Mission objective detected. Flight assist off. Flight assist off.
Further Omega Grid secrets revealed. ACT has released details about a plan by the Lords of Restoration to frame Hadrian Augustus Duval as the leader of the NMLA. The information was extracted from the NMLA's Omega Grid network and published by Captain Saskia Landau. It was Senator Ursula Torquatus who devised a scheme to undermine the imperial family and turn citizens against them by exposing a Duval as the NMLA mastermind. Hadrian Duval was seen as the logical choice since many viewed him as an extremist through his prior association with Nova Imperium, though Emperor Arisa Lavigny Duval officially pardoned him in 3306. The Lords of Restoration used a virtual doppelganger of the Emperor, indistinguishable from authentic transmissions, to convince the Senate that she was communicating from a safe location. A similar doppelganger was developed to replicate Hadrian and was used to send orders to NMLA allies such as the Landgrave of Madrid. This is how they planted evidence, discovered in April 3307, that Hadrian had converted to Neo-Marlinism and was determined to wipe out all other Duvals. Yet, despite triggering an unsuccessful federal attack in the Parisa system, the accusation was not verified or widely believed. Months later, the Lords of Restoration tried to kill Hadrian and Lady Astrid before their son Hector could be born, fearing the continuation of the Duval dynasty. But other senators moved the family to a secure location, beyond the reach of their agents. Hadrian Duval has publicly thanked ACT for uncovering this information and officially absolving him of all suspicion in this matter.
Audio should be good. The green screen looks fucked up. Give me just a second. There we go. There we go. That's a little better. Greetings to all again. Yes. So I've not been here for a couple of weeks. The first week, I honestly just forgot that it was Tuesday again. So I didn't do the stream. And then the second week, I set everything up, green screen, lights. I got everything ready to go, and then I didn't feel like doing the stream, so I didn't do the stream. I don't really feel the need to justify my decision, so I won't. As you may have noticed, for anyone that's actually been watching these Tuesday streams, that's a different intro. I debuted that intro with the most recent entry into the Nain logs. That occurred just after, I believe it was just after the end or just before the end of the second week of the Colonia Bridge project that Brewer Corporation's working on. It's not a real corporation. It's an in-game corporation. They're building a Colonia Bridge to make it easier for people to fly from the bubble to Colonia. I'm currently in the Colonia region now, after having shipped out about 20,000 tons of water purifiers and computer components. And I have spent the last couple of days checking out occupied space in the Colonia region, picking up liquor, dropping off small loads of liquor here and there when I find them in the various populated regions of the Colonia Nebula. I will probably be doing that for a while for narrative reasons. For those who've been keeping up, there's a lot going on in the bubble that I find to be really interesting. And I'm writing my narrative, dovetailing my narrative around what the writers at Frontier Developments have decided for themselves. For anyone who's familiar with what I've been doing, that's been sort of the basis for the narratives the entire time, is taking what Frontier Developments has been doing with their own narratives and dovetailing the narrative of these two young pilots and their handler who work for this mysterious consortium organization type thing, and dovetailing their individual narratives around, or rather embedding their individual narratives within what's going on in the space around them. Again, it's a relatively big storyline in terms of anyone with an interest in fictional political intrigue. So I like it. Good job again to those guys over there. Really well. With a story that's relatively complex. This will actually be my last reading stream for a little while. For those that have been doing the readings, you'll know that I have entered into a bit of a heady area within my own narrative. So I'm going to be spending a little bit of time focusing on that, refocusing my thoughts around what I'll be doing there as I continue doing what I'm doing, which is whatever I feel like doing. This final set of readings, I believe, puts me at about 7 or 8 weeks worth of readings, maybe 6. That's enough for like a mini semester. So for anyone who has kept pace with what I was doing in the streams, I highly recommend. Not for any real reason, as much as just for your own personal edification. You go through those readings. You probably don't have to listen to the entirety of the readings as much as go through, figure out what the readings are, and then go ahead and pick up those books, go to your library, go to your UC library. What is it? University of California. Out here, we've got Hastings and UC Berkeley. You've got UCSF if you're interested in like fucking medical shit and biopharm. The UC Berkeley library is probably the one library that will have the type of things you're looking for in terms of what I'm putting out there. You can go in there, you can read your books. You can go to your main libraries too. Check out the books, read them, read through them. Take your time. It's 8 weeks of readings, so in a normal course of your everyday lives, you can probably get through them in 12, 16 weeks. Every single one of those books. In about 12 to 16 weeks. You can probably do an 8 or 6 if you're one of those. But yeah, for your own personal edification, it'll give you a good idea of sort of where I'm at in terms of my thought processes during the writing process, what's sort of been up there brewing and fermenting and distilling, and then being put into words through the narratives. It's all this stuff is sort of informed by the things you've just been hailstormed by. There's a lot going on in the world. I don't need to talk about it. Everyone knows what's happening right now. And if you don't, why? But why though, right? So I'm just going to get to the readings. Before I do that, for the new intro, original piece of music. The combat video was taken from my original piece of music, yes. The combat footage was taken from the 2 days in Summerland, where I was not doing anything for the CG. Again, for narrative purposes, you'll see that if you do the reading. And the original intro is nearly intact. The original intro from at the very beginning is nearly intact. I haven't done much work with Coral because there was just a lot more interesting stuff going on that I could do with Cadence's side, which is my PlayStation 4 account. Because the resources on Cadence's side are just way easier to come by. Also, my computer is not exactly the strongest for rendering three-dimensional graphics. I do all of my video editing on there. It does a perfectly fine job. It's great at that. But in terms of like the 3D rendering, it's not there for this. It wasn't made for me to play video games on it. So I may end up back on the Coral side, which is the PC side, since I'm over back in Colonia, but there is a very specific narrative tie to the area that is another thing I'll have to focus on when I go through and go back in and refocus on the narrative and the writing. So to begin with the readings that I'm going to do, I will be starting with a book that I picked up when I was out in Virginia called Translating Worlds. It is a compilation of books in the field of anthropology and, according to this, anthropology, language, and linguistics that was put out by HAW. H-A-W. I think that's a university. Give me just a second, let me look that up. No, it's not a university, it's just HAW. HAW. which is a publishing company that is run by the University of Chicago Press. Now, these HOW guys, they put out, what do they call those things? Magazines? They put out periodicals on the field of anthropology every quarter. I've read through a few of the articles. They've got a back catalog that stretches to the early 2000s, something like that. They're all available online. You can purchase the actual articles as well, or the actual quarterlies, if you so choose to do so. But they have their entire back catalog posted, so if you're looking for something on what's anthropological in nature, money. If you're looking for something on money, I believe they have an entire periodical dedicated to the ideas, the anthropology of money and currency and things of that sort. Anything basically having to do with the ethnographic study, the anthropological study of a thing. You will likely find at this house. It's University of Chicago, so they'll have their own take. You can find a lot of stuff from any other university that has a specific take on anthropology as well. But I happen to have picked this book up because I found it interesting. It's called Translating Worlds, the Epistemological Space of Translation. I don't really have any thoughts on it beyond that. Check them out if you're one of those students that work in that field, or you're just interested in that kind of stuff. This piece of work, Translating Worlds, the Epistemological Space of Translation, the compilation edited by Carlos Avery and William F. Hanks. It was published in 2015, and it is the first of the House Special Issues in Ethnographic Theories series, Volume 1. Now, there's a large list of contributors, none of whom I'm particularly familiar with. I am not a linguist. I am not an anthropologist. And my interest in the field of anthropology extends mostly into the methodology and the idea that there is a very specific thing that unites human beings as a species. And it has spiraled outward from there. To simplify it in an amazingly simplified way. But I have read through this for the very specific purpose of coming to a better understanding of the process of, and I don't want to use the title of the book, but I need to, translating ideas that are very specific to a specific group of people, to a specific culture, and trying to make that idea make sense in such a way that I understand it in my own, from within my own cultural understanding, which apparently is like an important aspect of that field. Is making shit make sense from one culture to the next. I didn't make those rules, but that's how it works. So that's what they say. The essay that I'm going to be reading happens to be the last chapter of the book, an essay written by G.E.R. Lloyd. It's called On the Very Possibility of Mutual Intelligibility. I had a thought to expound upon in terms of why this idea is important, and then I decided not to. I wanted to let you know that that's why I paused just then. So I'm just going to begin the reading. Like the ethnographer, the student of ancient societies is faced with a recurrent problem of translation. and in one important respect suffers from an obvious considerable disadvantage. Modern ethnographers can question members of the groups they study to get some reaction to the question of whether or how well they have understood them. So the quality of the response will reflect the relationship the ethnographer has been able to build up. He or she may be told, simply out of politeness, how brilliantly he or she has grasped the meaning of their words and of their actions. The ancient historian is just confronted by documents and texts. Those who have survived the vagaries of transmission and are mostly now buried beneath a pile of previous interpretations. In both cases, we have to be realistic about the level of understanding that can be achieved. We have also to be realistic about the level of understanding attainable even when the conditions are optimal. When we are dealing with someone who shares with us the same natural language, maybe also the same upbringing and environment. Particular problems of trying to grasp the meaning of some ancient text in a foreign language, or the work of an author as a whole, are mirrored, even if less severely, in our efforts to understand some writing in English. What is it to say that we have grasped the meaning of King Lear, let alone Shakespeare as a whole, or to come down to today, of Salman Rushdie or A.S. Byatt? To state the obvious, it is never the question of the meaning, just the one, but always of multiple meanings. The point is familiar from religious hermeneutics, and although in that context we may sometimes suspect deliberate mystification, the lesson that readings are open-ended is surely obvious across the board. Not even scientific communications are immune to multiple interpretations. But if being realistic means we have to acknowledge difficulties, it also means that we should not be unduly pessimistic, which is certainly part of the message Hanks and Severi have insisted upon. One important point about translation and about understanding in general is that, although always difficult and always imperfect, it is seldom, they would never say never, it is seldom, they would say never, the case that we have to admit to complete and utter defeat. This is true even with terms that are admitted to have no exact single equivalent in any but the natural languages in which they occur, like German, God damn you, Gemütlichkeit, 8 other languages, Welsh, Chwal, Russian Tosca, or Ifaluk Fago, where we can get at least some inkling of what they cover. Not interesting. No ethnographer returns from the field to say that he or she understood nothing of the society that was the subject of investigation. No ethnographer returns from the field to say that he or she understood nothing of the society that was the subject of investigation. No student of ancient Greek philosophy admits to understanding Plato not at all. It is only if we have no grasp whatsoever of a particular language that we must admit to total incomprehension of the words at least. And even then, the body language of our interlocutors may leave us in little doubt about some of their feelings. But the first line of the Dao Zhe Jing, use the weird way to say it. When the first line of the Dao Zhe Jing means Dao Ke Do Fei Shan Dao, I can't speak Chinese. Yoshing. Has been the subject of countless commentaries down the ages in many different languages. If you have some classical Chinese, you will know, for instance, that Dao can mean not just way, but also guide. That is, show as the way. So while the first Dao is the way, with all its multiple associations, the second Dao can be taken as shown as a Dao. So that the whole says very roughly, the way that is thereby the way that can be spoken of as a way is not the constant way. That reminds me of Cobra Kai, season 4. Read that line again, just so you fucking know. The way that can be spoken of as a way is not the constant way. The constant Chang or Shang way is thereby contrasted with others that fail the requirement of constancy because they can be spoken of. That illustrates what an approximate translation can be like, the added bonus, perhaps, of the substantive message to do with, in, expressibility that this particular famous line conveys. We can study the range of usage of Tao and that of Chang, 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 Chang. At some point, some might attempt to cordon off literal from metaphorical or figurative uses. That is one of the dichotomies that cannot be taken for granted. I have rehearsed my reasons for challenging it on other occasions. A preferred alternative is to make use of the notion of semantic stretch, which has the advantage that it allows all terms to have some stretch. It allows that all terms have some stretch. Tao may be exceptional. There is a Tao of butchery and even one of robbery. Though it is the Tao of the sages to which one aspires. Yet it is as well to make allowance for stretch in every term in any communicative exchange, and that is even before we factor in further complex points from the pragmatics of the situation. When a live conversation is in question, there is the body language of the speakers to consider, and the relationships between them, of friendliness or hostility, cooperativeness or competitiveness, superiority or deference. That may seem to open up an infinite number of options for interpretation far beyond anything that Wittgenstein contemplated when discussing family resemblances in his famous discussion of the concept of game, not forgetting his own notion of language games. Yet semantic stretch, so far from precluding progress in understanding, may even be a necessary condition for it. Possibilities in interpretation are not limitless, even when we are faced with a Tao Jing. But they are liable to be prematurely circumscribed if we start from the assumption that there is just one correct understanding to be secured by homing in on a single literal meaning. We must acknowledge that much always escapes us. That does not mean that we are always in a state of complete bafflement. Reminding ourselves that we may not have got it right is always salutary, but should encourage us not simply to give up in despair, but to renew our efforts. This is, of course, what we naturally do, at least when we are not inhibited by some sense that we must be able to resolve the philosophical issues before we can even start. Texts look as if they ought to say something we shall have some opportunity to construe in other terms, even if that may involve heavy paraphrasing. What about pieces of music, works of art, ritual performances? We should not say that they do not signify anything, even when, as often, they do not refer. But to begin to put into words what we believe them to signify is always difficult, often seemingly impossible. What Beethoven's Fifth Symphony meant for the different members of the audience, whom E.M. Forster described as listening to it in Howard's End, is expressed in that novel, in what now seem rather jejune terms. But in any case, what a piece of music means for one person on one occasion is never going to be precisely what it means for another on that occasion, or even for the same person on a different occasion. God damn. Again, the hermeneutic temptation is to elide all that diversity to get at some essential core understanding. But to do so is always going to be reductionist, always to miss the opportunity to explore other possible resonances and associations. Warnings as to the difficulty and the imperfection of understanding are always needed. It is amazing how much we can understand, including across different languages and dealing with unfamiliar subject matter. We should never underestimate the capacity of humans to learn and to adapt, even in the face of pressures that urge us to stay with the views and practices of our elders and betters. Sure, we sometimes delude ourselves that we are on the right track. True, we are sometimes the victim of deliberate deception on the part of our interlocutors. translators. Translators, for those who know the reference. But that would not be possible if there was always deception. Our default assumption is that we are not deliberately misled. Our default assumption is that we are not being deliberately misled by our partners in conversation. Obscurantism, in turn, is only recognizable by contrast with the relatively plain and clear. The fact that, with the help of an interlocutor, or just on our own, we can improve our grasp of what is being communicated and correct some of our misunderstandings. The very fact that, with the help of an interlocutor, or just on our own, we can improve our grasp of what is being communicated and correct some of our misunderstandings should encourage us to continue our efforts, including in the face of an insistence on the part of those interlocutors an apparent message of a text that we are dealing with is inexpressible. Dao ke dao fei chun dao, what the fuck? Takes away with one hand, but gives us something with the other. It is true that some aspects of modern philosophical discussion of the problems have not helped as much as they might. Quine's inscrutability of reference, I don't know if that's how it's pronounced, and Kuhn's incommensurable paradigms certainly underline the difficulties. We can concede that ultimately reference is inscrutable without conceding that it is arbitrary. Even if there is always an element of indeterminacy, we can narrow down the possibilities by a process we may compare to bracketing, in particular by excluding what lies outside the brackets. There was no ostrich on the scene when our friend announced Gava Guy, while there was indeed a rabbit, so it is less likely that Gava Guy has to do with an ostrich or even temporal ostrich slices than with something to do with rabbits, even though it may not be the creature in mind, but rather the event, or again it might be neither. Even when a rabbit event occurs, there are always plenty of other items and occurrences in the scene that may have occasioned the comment. Faced with the first exclamation Gava Guy, the outsider will be baffled. Sufficient repetition of the word should get the process of bracketing underway. Similarly, I learned to recognize while, roughly inspired speech, by being exposed to it on many occasions and registering that people acknowledge it in some speakers but not in others, in some performances but not in others. As for Kuhn's incommensurabilities, they do not preclude, but may even presuppose the possibility of comparison, where at least we can make a start. There's no common measure for the side and the diagonal of a square. But we can certainly say that the diagonal is longer than the side. It is only if both are recognized as lengths that we can say that they are incommensurable. We don't bother to remark that there is no common measure between a length and a color, for that involves a straightforward category mistake. Paradigm shifts always pose tough problems for interpretation, especially when the same term, say force or weight or mass, comes to be used with quite new senses in reference. The stock historical instances used to illustrate such shifts, we should not say, but in the stock historical instances used to illustrate such shifts, we should not say there was a total lack of comprehension between the parties. Copernicus certainly had a fair grasp of Ptolemy's astronomical system, Galileo of Aristotle's idea of natural motion, Einstein of Newton's classical dynamics, even when the definitions of key terms were being transformed, and new ones had to be coined to convey new understanding. While the ideas of Quine, whatever it's called, and Kuhn have often been construed as threatening to undermine mutual intelligibility, conversely other attempts have come to its defense, likewise, may suffer from shortcomings. But, while the ideas of Quine and Kuhn have often been construed as threatening to undermine mutual intelligibility, conversely other attempts have come to its defense, likewise, may suffer from shortcomings. It's poorly punctuated. Faced with such famous... it's coming from me, man. Faced with such famous but much abused examples as the Nuer belief that twins are birds, or the Dorses that the leopard is a Christian animal, Some adopt Davidson's hermeneutic principle of charity in interpretation, which recommends that whatever statements are reported should be construed, so far as possible, as making sense in our terms. Man, over there, on the other side of the wall, that I can feel. Maybe we can find points of similarity between twins and birds, and again between leopard behavior and Christian behavior, to see how the reported belief can be made to make sense, without our having to follow those interpretations who have recourse to the idea that the statements were not meant literally, but only metaphorically. Trying to decide between those alternatives regularly led to an impasse, the problem being compounded by the fact that the actors themselves, the Nuer and the Dorje, had no explicit categories. That is an important point. So I'm going to do that. Maybe we can find points of similarity between twins and birds, and again between leopard behavior and Christian behavior, to see how the reported belief can be made to make sense, without our having to follow those interpreters who have recourse to the idea that the statements were not meant literally, but only metaphorically. Trying to decide between those alternatives regularly led to an impasse. The problem being compounded by the fact that the actors themselves, the Nuer and the Dorje, had no such explicit categories. On the one hand, the supposition that those holding what seem to us counterintuitive beliefs are just foolish or irrational obviously will not do as a general methodological principle. There are fools in every society, not excluding our own. But attempting to diagnose wholesale folly in whole communities is not just racist, but hardly compatible with the evident ability to survive, often in different circumstances, including many where the average urbanized citizens of advanced industrial societies would simply perish. Yet that, of course, is not to say that every custom and belief that is maintained in any human group is well adapted to the aims of survival or flourishing. That would be straightforwardly to commit the functionalist fallacy. Oh God. Oh God. I drank a lot the other night, and then I tore up my throat in the next morning, so you'll have to forgive me for my hoarseness, my coughing. Anyway, but on the other, I drank a lot, like more than I should have. It's probably not a good idea. Nonetheless, but on the other hand, the translation of Nuer or Dor's beliefs into terms that make sense according to our given categories presupposes that those categories are already up to the job. There's no reason a priori to go along with that. Oh God. Evans Pritchard was a great ethnographer, but to tell the truth, some of his interpretations now reek. Some of his own preoccupations, theological ones perhaps especially. Faced with those counterintuitive statements, whether an ethnography or in ancient texts, we may need to revise our own categories and understandings, quite substantially perhaps, on such matters as the notion of a person, for instance, or of agency and causation. I'm going to read that one again too. Faced with those counterintuitive statements, whether in ethnography or in ancient texts, we may need to revise our own categories and understandings, quite substantially perhaps, on such matters of the notion of a person, for instance, or of agency and causation. It cannot be assumed that our existing concepts will be adequate, and to do so is to miss the opportunities for learning that ethnography and the study of ancient societies both present. I believe my exposure to ancient Greek and Chinese ideas have taught me a thing or two. I shall give an example, nature, shortly. Such general points are particularly germane to the recent ontological turn in anthropology. The explorations of radically different ontologies in De Scola, or the perspectivism in Vivieres de Castro. I don't know where that is. It's a place, though, apparently. Or a person. Probably a person. Yeah, it's a person. That sounds like a place. Anyway. In the perspectivism of Vivieros de Castro, it is not nature that is universal while cultures differ. Rather, all beings share cultures while natures differ. So this is monoculturalism and multinaturalism as opposed to multiculturalism and mononaturalism. Moreover, key categories that we might suppose to be given in nature, animal and human among them, turn out to be inherently relational. While humans see themselves as humans and animals as animals, and even spirits if they see them, while humans see themselves as humans, and humans see animals as animals, and even spirits if they see them as spirits, animals see themselves as human and humans as animals, whether as predators or as prey. This is in the writing. De Scola invokes some of the same ethnographic data in defining what he calls animism. But that, for him, is only one of 4 different ontological regimes, varying according to the continuity and discontinuity they assume with regard to interiority and physicality. He uses 2 differentiate to give him his 4-fold schema: animism, totemism, analogism, and naturalism, which he uses to investigate practices of giving, taking, exchanging, producing, protecting, and transmitting. While De Scola calls these ontologies, Severi has pointed out that they differ from the philosophical usage of that term in being much looser and less explicit. What is particularly interesting about them is precisely their unsystematic character, the fact that they always leave a space open for different strategies of thought. This is the point he made to drive a wedge between some of my ancient ontologies and De Scola's regimes. Ideal types, as Anne Christine Taylor in 2013 has insisted. The implications of both De Scola and Vivieres de Castro's view for translation and understanding are momentous. From the jaguar's perspective, the blood of his prey is a manioc beer. This controlled equivocation, as Vivieres de Castro calls it. Oh, this is the one I'm at. From the jaguar's perspective, the blood of his prey, as we see it, is manioc beer. This controlled equivocation, as Vivieres de Castro calls it, might appear to a naturalist completely to undermine mutual understanding, to the point where the only thing we can understand is that the jaguar's perception is indeed radically different from ours. But that does not say anything about his understanding, except that it appears that jaguars, like us, enjoy drinking beer. Christians. Wait, was that jaguars or leopards? Hold on. Leopards. Are those different? Yeah, those are different. Yet, that is to miss the whole point of perspectivism, which is that both the senses and the reference of terms, including beer, shift across the languages of different kinds of creatures, being relative to the creatures in question, in particular being determined by the bodies they have. Translation is then a matter not of finding equivalent words to convey information about a single word, but of identifying different words to which the same words apply. How is the jaguar's perspective to be accessed? There's only shamans who are in a position to confidently pronounce on that. They alone can cross species boundaries, which in turn means that what is taken for a jaguar may be a shaman in disguise, or vice versa. I'm going to reread that to you now. But how is the jaguar's perspective to be accessed? There's only shamans who are in a position to confidently pronounce on that. For they alone can cross species boundaries, which in turn means that what is taken for a jaguar may be a shaman in disguise, or vice versa. It is certainly not easy to know where you are. That is precisely the fundamental message. Rather than conclude that this difficulty, for us, of accessing others' perspectives undermines the whole enterprise, which reflect on what we can learn from considering what it would be for persons and substances to be relational. Where we can start from and use as a model our familiar, banal acceptance that the same individual can be both father, brother, and son. Though in the perspectivist process, the same individual gets to be radically reinterpreted. The Akwar and Arawite, and many other groups, not limited to Amazonia, of course, hold that other beings beside themselves are defined by the culture, rituals, rules of exchange, and so on, that constitute their way of being in the world. What each kind of being apprehends depends on the bodies they have. The same applies, these people would say, to the whites who come to study them, for they have the customs they have because their bodies are as they are. It is clear that the Akwar and the Arawite themselves puzzle over the whites studying them. Indeed, they can be said to do anthropology on the whites, as much as the whites do anthropology on them, as Viveiros de Castro suggested in his Cannibal Metaphysics. But their anthropology does not presuppose the same commonalities and divergences as ours does, for, as I noted, their commonalities relate to culture, their divergences to nature. You should know that in that previous paragraph, the word whites is constantly written in capital, which is to indicate that whites is a concept that carries with it innumerable assumptions and layers of meaning to those who are being studied by them. I'll continue with the reading. Now I must recognize my own limitations in the face of the ethnographic aspects of the issues of translation raised by the ontological turn. But I do not think it is impossible to bring to bear some historical points from the study of ancient ontologies. At least my investigations of those ontologies prompt me to propose a different way of bypassing the treacherous dichotomy between nature and culture, which was of course what Descolo's book set out to transcend and was radically revised by Viveiros de Castro. My historical analysis of how the concepts of nature, natura, Greek physis, originate in the West yields what may be a crucial point. They were very much the product of a particular polemical situation for which we have direct evidence in Greece. The concepts of nature, natura, physis originate in the West. How the concepts of nature, natura, Greek physis originate in the West yields that they were very much a product of a particular polemical situation. Concepts were developed within a specific situation and developed in the way that they developed because that situation and in relation to that situation. Things that developed because of the thing that they developed around. Like a pearl in an oyster. Developing around a giant piece of shit. Those who went into... I'm going to continue with the reading now. Those who went into battle there, under the banner of Physis, was dubbed the Physikoi, or natural philosophers. They begin to be prominent in the 5th and 4th centuries BCE. They claimed nature as the domain over which they were to be acknowledged experts. Where traditionally in Greece such phenomena as earthquakes, thunder, lightning, eclipses, and diseases had generally been assumed to be the work of the gods, they were not natural phenomena then. Physikoi, argued that they were a category mistake. It was to ignore that these phenomena had regular causes, natures in fact, that could be investigated. They, the natural philosophers, could supply the correct theories and explanations, but most of those they proposed were quite fantastical. Where the traditionalists faced with lightning saw Zeus at work, the naturalists spoke of clashing clouds or whatever. Where the traditionalists saw eclipses as omens, and the naturalists said they were regular and predictable. And note that in this instance it would be hard to apply the point that these different perceptions were due to differences in the bodies of the actors concerned. Move into a different mode of discourse, one that depends heavily, most say, on literacy and a certain level of complexity of social organization. Yet reference to ancient society shows that literacy itself cannot be the whole answer. Ancient China had no single concept that covered what physis covers in Greek or natura in Latin. The same applies to every other ancient society in which I am familiar, Mesopotamia, Egypt, India, though I know far less about them. Chinese recognize the spontaneous as the spontaneous, heaven and earth as heaven and earth. The different characteristics that different creatures, including humans, are born with as those characteristics, and so on. They were not tempted to suppose that they were dealing with the same problem in all those instances. Nor were they tempted to read off value judgments from nature as such, even though they certainly debated moral questions and took different views on whether humans are inherently good, bad, or indifferent. Nature, I conclude, is not natural at all, but a cultural artifact, as much as a political regime or a set of religious beliefs and practices is. And that should release us from any assumption that whatever people thought they were dealing with in the physical world has to correspond to nature, has to be shoehorned into our category, in other words. Of course, some idea of the regularities in the phenomena is universal. We rely on that when we plant crops or light a fire. But the which phenomena they are, and how exceptions are to be accounted for, are questions. We cannot just assume that an explicit concept of nature will provide the answers. So when I claim that nature is an invention, I'm sometimes understood to mean that just the understanding of nature is. In fact, I make a much stronger claim, that our notion of nature is not fit for purpose, but a trap. It's a trap. We hold that nature is out there waiting to be discovered. I don't have that clip lined up. We hold that nature is out there waiting to be discovered. We have simply not been critical enough of our own pet assumptions. That is a conclusion that the ontological turn in anthropology partly agrees with, but maybe for different reasons. The way I recognize the pluralism in ontologies proceeds rather differently from De Scola's or Vivier or De Castro's approach. I agree with them in rejecting the assumed privilege status of a naturalist ontology. My brand of ontological pluralism is a matter of what I call the multidimensionality of the phenomena, or alternately, the multidimensionality of reality. It may seem shocking to consider those two formulations interchangeable, but the appearance-reality dichotomy is another one that needs to be pensioned off. In many contexts, what is real is what appears, and conversely, though, to be sure, appearances may deceive. Then reality too may hide. The more important point, in both cases, is the possible, indeed the likely, multidimensionality. Let me cite one of my favorite examples, color, to illustrate the multidimensionality. In that case, 3 dimensions of hue, luminosity, and saturation provide 3 different sets of differentiations. I'm gonna fuck with you guys right quick. Hold on. See if that has it. What doesn't? What doesn't have it? Oh shit. Hold on. That's not that. I don't. Hold on. Yeah, it doesn't matter. Let me cite one of my favorite examples, color, to illustrate that multidimensionality. In that case, the three dimensions of hue, luminosity, and saturation provide three different sets of differentiations. Well, that point is not always taken into account, particularly for those on the hunt for cross-cultural universals. There's no one correct way to talk about color. We should not privilege one of the three ways and exclude the other two. All three are valid, and it is a mistake to think that we have to choose between them. That does not mean that this introduces ambiguities that preclude generalization. It is true that a multidimensional phenomena cannot be given per genus et differentiam definition, but it can and should be given a disjunctive definition, where each of the disjuncts in the color case, hue, luminosity, and saturation, can be identified unambiguously, though each has its considerable semantic stretch. But if thus far my position is relativist, it is not at all relativist insofar as I recognize that in each case, there are more or less correct ways of doing differentiations. Color talk is certainly not merely arbitrary. It's not the case there that just anything goes, whatever Feyerabend may have claimed. Nor is it impossible to allow Feyerabend may have claimed. Nor is it impossible to allow communication between different modes of colored talk, even though the particular vocabulary for the particular differentiations, in my view, may be distinctive for that particular mode. Multidimensionality does not rule out mutual intelligibility. Move. In this case, it may even be a necessary condition for it. I discussed Paul Feyerabend's work in a previous stream. So in the event that you would like to look up that shit, it has to do with the production of anarchy in science when science becomes root-bound. That's literally what it's about. To re-embed the quote, anything goes, in its appropriate scholastic place. The consequences for translation and understanding go like this. A vocabulary that simply differentiates hues will not by itself be up to the task of capturing the other two modes of differentiation. Thus far, translation is not possible if we stick to that single vocabulary. But why should we have to? What we need is complementary modes of discourse to do justice to all three dimensions of differentiation, yielding a more comprehensive understanding of the subject matter. Then there is nothing to prevent our conveying the complementary character of the phenomena in different natural languages with more or less adequate translations between them. In some cases, neologisms will be needed. In many cases, the idiosyncratic range of particular color terms in one language will need a gloss or paraphrase in another. French brune is an oddball from an Anglo-Saxon point of view, and so is blonde used of tobacco and beer. But of course the phenomena is not confined to French. Ancient Greek xanthon and chloron, conventionally inadequately rendered as yellow and green, are other examples. Chloron, for example, denotes what is fresh, unripe, full of sap. In many cases, what may be represented as color terms may come to be seen as not color terms at all, but rather terms to pick out the living from the dead, or the succulent from the dry. Picking out the succulent from the dry. Felt good to say, finally get out there. Within a single natural language, there will be shifts between one register and another, and other possible sources of ambiguity, but at least we shall not be driven, as the former British Prime Minister William Gladstone thought he was driven, from the observation that ancient Greek focused especially on luminosity to conclude that they were all colorblind and could not distinguish hues. He never read Or if he read, he ignored Aristotle on the rainbow. Or I may now ask more generally, do my suggestions leave the epistemology of anthropology or of ancient history? Does the ontological turn in anthropology spell the demise of epistemology? Or, some have thought, leaving us perhaps with the conclusion that epistemologies are relative to the distinctive ontologies in play. Once again that gestures towards a conclusion of mutual unintelligibility. But once again that may be resisted. It is true that traditional dichotomies or dualisms within epistemology, between reason and perception, between the a priori and the empirical, once again exhibit their limitations if considered as alternatives. But the correct response is not to abandon both sides of each pair, nor to plump for one to the exclusion of the other, but to combine them. That corresponds to my own practice here. For on the one hand, I have been discussing what understanding is possible on the basis of abstract analysis, but on the other, I do that with as much attention as I can to manage to empirical case studies. But on the other hand, I do that with as much attention as I can manage to empirical case studies, which can act as a check on where the analysis needs correcting and complexifying. Epistemology, on this view, is not the bogeyman that has been represented as being by those who suspect that it is merely a covert way of denying others' claims to know. The multidimensionality of what is there to be known cannot help but generate a multidimensionality of ways of knowing. Holy shit. The multidimensionality of what is there to be known cannot help but generate a multidimensionality of ways of knowing. But several, possibly fundamental objections to my use of those notions of multidimensionality and of semantic stretch must now be met in conclusion. First, it might be argued that I am still trapped in my own particular conceptual framework, even that everyone always is. Is it not the case that others' categories either will be reduced to mine or will forever remain beyond reach? Of course, my particular conceptual resources are whatever they are at any moment in time, though I can see they have changed over time, as I said. My answer to that first question would be to reject the alternative, provided I am indeed allowed to point that conceptual frameworks, like languages themselves, are revisable. Reductionism can be avoided. Then a second objection might be that I am somehow presupposing some transcendent meta-language into which all others can be parsed, which surely savors the Western hegemonic pretensions. Give me a place to stand and I can move the world. Again I would resist, for I would claim both that I allow a voice to each pluralist rendering of multidimensionality, that I recognize the revisability, the imperfections of my own understanding. A single meta-language, let alone one that imposes a rule of... A single meta-language, let alone one that imposes a rule of strict univocity. Holy shit, that's a word. Univocity, vocative, is a chimera. A single meta-language, let alone one that imposes a rule of strict univocity, is a chimera. Rather, we can and should exploit the full resources of every understanding to which we have access, and that will include those expressed in actions rather than words. I am reminded of a Chinese historian Zhuangzi about Carpenter Bian. He had the cheek to reprimand his employer, Duke Wan, for reading old books. The Duke protests, "What business is it of a carpenter to criticize what I read? You can explain yourself well and good, but if not, you die." Oh man, that's crucial. That's a crucial conflict there, gentlemen. I am reminded of the Chinese story of Zhuangzi about Carpenter Bian. He had the cheek to reprimand his employer, Duke Wan, for reading old books. The Duke protests, "What business is it of a carpenter to criticize what I read? You can explain yourself well and good, but if not, you die." whereupon BN refers to his own work as a carpenter. When he makes a wheel, if he chips at it too slowly, the chisel slips and does not grip. If he is too fast, the chisel jams and catches the wood. The right way to do it is something he feels in his hands, but he cannot put into words. That's how one becomes an expert carpenter, and the books of the past are just dregs. In such a case, the feeling is the understanding. However, kill him. However, even if we why does that even mean? However, if we reject the notion of meta-language, the problem does not go away. Indeed, it might be thought aggravated by that rejection. How, I asked, is any translation across ontologies to be achieved? It is all very well, some will say, to insist that reality is multidimensional, that every term exhibits some degree of semantic stretch, but how does that bridge the gulf between divergent perspectives? If we reject the realist option, according to which only one ontology is correct, and the others must be dismissed as mistaken, are we not forced to the relativist view, according to which not only should we say all are correct, but also that there is no neutral way of judging them? Once again, that dichotomy obstructs a resolution. Multidimensional move would have it first that each ontology deals with a particular manner of ordering reality, including the key considerations of interiority and physicality. Secondly, each may do so in a more or less satisfactory, and certainly not arbitrary way. More or less satisfactory to whom? In the first instance, of course, to the actors themselves, to the Aquar and the Aruite, and to all those others whose cosmologies have been explored by the ethnographers, allowing, as before, that some are more explicit and comprehensive than others. But it is up to observers, to us, to see that we can learn from the exercise of investigating their ways of being in the world. Receiving a phone call from a member of my housing board option. Give me just a second, I have to take this phone call.
Mission objective detected. Flight assist off. Flight assist off.
Further Omega Grid secrets revealed. ACT has released details about a plan by the Lords of Restoration to frame Hadrian Augustus de Val as the leader of the NMLA. The information was extracted from the NMLA's Omega Grid network and published by Captain Saskia Landau. It was Senator Ursula Torquatus who devised a scheme to undermine the imperial family and turn citizens against them by exposing a de Val as the NMLA mastermind. Hadrian Duval was seen as the logical choice since many viewed him as an extremist through his prior association with Nova Imperium, though Emperor Arisa Lavigny Duval officially pardoned him in 3306. The Lords of Restoration used a virtual doppelganger of the Emperor, indistinguishable from authentic transmissions, to convince the Senate that she was communicating from a safe location. A similar doppelganger was developed to replicate Hadrian and was used to send orders to NMLA allies such as the Landgrave of Madrid. This is how they planted evidence, discovered in April 3307, that Hadrian had converted to Neo-Marlinism and was determined to wipe out all other Duvals. Yet, despite triggering an unsuccessful federal attack in the Paris system, the accusation was not verified or widely believed. Months later, the Lords of Restoration tried to kill Hadrian and Lady Astrid before their son Hector could be born, fearing the continuation of the Duval dynasty. But other senators moved the family to a secure location, beyond the reach of their agents. Hadrian Duval has publicly thanked ACT for uncovering this information and officially absolving him of all suspicion in this matter.
What the fuck just happened? Alright, I'm gonna get back to the reading. I don't know why I said housing board. We don't have a housing board. What are they called? Management. Something like that. Whatever they call themselves. Anyway, I'm gonna get back to the reading. This is right at the end. So, once again, that dichotomy obstructs a resolution. We're looking at reconciling the fuckeries of translation and how to negotiate and settle on specific ratios based on whatever it is you're working on. The dichotomy obstructs a resolution. A multi-dimensional move would have it first that each ontology deals with a particular manner of ordering reality, including the key considerations of interiority and physicality. Secondly, each may do so in a more or less satisfactory and certainly not arbitrary way. More or less satisfactory to whom? In the first instance, of course, to the actors themselves, to the Aquar and the Arouete, and to all those others whose cosmologies have been explored by the ethnographers, allowing as before that some are more explicit and comprehensive than others. It is up to observers, to us. See, we can learn from the exercise of investigating their ways of being in the world. That means suspending disbelief and being prepared to revise just about everything we normally take for granted about those key concepts of person, agency, causation, space and time, and yes, certainly nature. Clearly, we must abandon the assumption that reality is a given, to which unmediated access is possible. Yet neither actors nor observers will settle for anything goes. But then, does that not amount to some wishy-washy, politically correct liberal relativism? What if we can still provide for the possibility of diagnosing error in ourselves and others, allowing that both of those are tricky, for different reasons, or we may be insufficiently self-critical in the first case and overcritical in the second. But evidently we are not infallible. No more was any given ancient Greek or Chinese thinker, no more a present-day Aquar and Arouete. But before we conclude that we or they have made a mistake, we have first to consider the complexities of interpretation that I have been talking about. There may always be an element of doubt about how thorough that exploration has been. In many cases, we may say that it can never be complete, and in some simple ones, it is certainly possible to draw a line and to reassure ourselves that the job has been adequately done, at least for the occasion in question. We have to get on with our everyday transactions, and indeed we do so. Of course, it is up to other researchers, not just ethnographers and ancient historians, but also linguists, cognitive scientists, evolutionary psychologists, react to these proposals. I attempt no general theory of translation, of course, let alone a general formula for how understanding is possible. But I offer these thoughts as suggestions about what can be reasonably expected, about how one can go about doing the job. The very open-endedness of translation may look to be a menace to mutual intelligibility. That is only so if we can hanker after definitive results. Abandoning that will-o'-the-wisp, we can rather welcome that open-endedness as a positive resource for increasing understanding. At the end of that essay, I assume that G.E.R. Lloyd has written other things. One can only assume that if he's in a book, he's probably written other shit. So like any other author, in the event that you were interested, Jeffrey E.R. Lloyd, this was a essay that looks to have been written somewhere, at some point. Has numerous books out, apparently a prolific writer, clearly. Published by Cambridge and Oxford on numerous occasions. Again, the author's name is Jeffrey E.R. Lloyd. And this specific essay was taken from read from a compilation titled Translating Worlds, the Epistemological Space of Translation. Published by How Books. You will recognize the How symbol from the television show Millennia, which is clearly what they're referring to and being crazy about or something. Published in 2015. Now, I am going to smoke a cigarette because fucking why not? And while I do that, I'm going to play again the Squadron Recruit video that I finished up at the end of last year. Where is it? Nain Incorporated. Bam.
Ship restraints retracted. Access corridor is clear.
Flight assist off.
From the dawn of humankind, we've looked to the stars for meaning. Amidst the trivialities of existence, they have watched over us and forgiven us our awe and wonder. The briefest respite between our labors and strife. In our arrogance, we surrendered to our own conceit. Our search became our right, and for millennia we spread our message of our rightful place amongst the stars with one another. The stars aligned with the to provide us with the guidance we required. Our labors became our destiny, our wars our triumph. We assumed our place amongst the stars, and the stars watched over us, shimmering in approval. In time we forgot. We grew indifferent to our watchful stewards, and turned our attention away from them. We turned to one another. We saw one another, and we took the guidance given us by the stars to show one another the error of one another's ways. The stars have shown us, we proclaimed. The labors we have undertaken and the wars we have fought sanctioned by the stars and just by their guidance. And others proclaim the stars' condemnation. It is our labors and wars sanctioned. The stars have shown us, the others proclaimed. In our arrogance, we tore the stars from one another. No longer joined as our watchful stewards, the stars became ours, and our rightful place amongst the stars was true to the stars' rightful place amongst us. And in our rightful place we labored, and we made war with one another. And the wars we made with one another drove us further and further amongst the stars, amongst ourselves. And amongst ourselves we looked for meaning. How long is this? I seriously think I'm gonna read all this, do you, Dad? Yeah, this is like 5 pages of garbage. Garbage, Dad!
Can you just...
What? just goes on and on. No one cares about this kind of stuff, Dad.
Just...
Gosh. I'm picking up here. In 2979, a consortium of scholars, pilots, and private interests came together to discuss our future. Amidst the wars between the Federation, the Empire, and the Alliance, the intrigue, the subterfuge, and the myriad labors of all powers, we were being reminded of our place amongst the stars. And the stars have begun to remind us of their place amongst us. We were not their equals. The stars, this consortium reminded us, had given us meaning and we had squandered its resolve. The stars, this consortium reminded us, had many others over whom they'd watched. And we came to know some of those others over whom the stars watched. The Guardians had taken their place amongst the stars long before us. The Thargoids had taken their place as well. And they too, the stars, reminded of their place. The stars watched over us all, and we had all grown arrogant in our assumption of our place amongst them. In our arrogance, we had turned to one another. We had once come to know our place amongst the stars was our own, this consortium reminded us. And this consortium reminded us that the stars had watched us come to know these things. The stars have begun again to provide us with meaning this consortium now wants us to know. And this consortium is resolved to remind us of this meaning. For this meaning is given us by the stars. This meaning is given us all, and this resolve the purpose of our labors, our strife. This consortium, we are now reminded, has resolved to remind us all the meaning given us by the stars to all, be us of the Empire, the Federation, the Alliance, or any others. In 3307, the labors and the strife of this consortium, undertaken to remind us all of the meaning being given us by the stars, were given a name. My name is Cadence, and I'm a pilot. My name is Coral. That's it? What? You're just gonna say your name and that's it? You're not gonna say anything about yourself? What, I need to label myself? None of us are scared like you, Cadence. What? I'm not insecure, you cunt. Don't talk to me like that.
Girls,
Fish.
for fuck's sake, can you just stick to the script, please?
Anyway, we're pilots. Speak for yourself. Commanders Half-Lock. We have come to you on behalf of this consortium. We have come to call upon you, as this consortium has charged us, to take your place in the labors and strife this consortium has resolved to undertake, to remind all of the meaning being given us by the stars, to remind all of our place amongst the stars and theirs amongst us. Join us, as this consortium of scholars, pilots, and private interests had joined one another, and had resolved to remind all of the meaning being given us by the stars. We are Nain Incorporated. Dad, do we really have to use these voice changers?
Girls.
Yeah, hold on. We just sound like
Girls.
a couple of guys.
We've assigned a landing pad for you. Be careful.
Right, I'm going to move on to the second reading now. This is another book that I read a bunch of times. That's about as much of an intro. It's called Imagined Communities. I covered the cover. It's called Imagined Communities. Hey, that's kind of... Anyway. Imagined Communities. Imagined Communities. It is one of those books that apparently people are fond of. This was published by Verso Books. It was written by Benedict Anderson. Again, apparently people like this book. And I will be reading a chapter from the book called The Origins of National Consciousness. The third chapter in the book, in a book of 11 chapters. The Origins of National Consciousness. The Origins of National Consciousness. Now, it opens with a reference to printing as one of those origins. I don't remember if the previous chapter deals with it or it's this chapter specifically. No, it's this chapter. Okay. If the development of print as commodity is the key to the generation of wholly new ideas of simultaneity, still we are simply at the point where communities of the type horizontal secular transverse time become possible. Why, in that type, did the nation become so popular? Horizontal secular transverse time is a topic that's dealt with in the previous chapter, Cultural Roots, and slightly in the first chapter, Introduction. The factors involved are obviously complex and various, but a strong case can be made for the primacy of capitalism. As already noted, at least 20 million books had already been printed by 1500, signaling the onset of Benjamin's age of mechanical reproduction. Benjamin. If manuscript knowledge was scarce and arcane lore, print knowledge lived by reproducibility and dissemination. If, as Favre and Martin believe, possibly as many as 200 million volumes had been manufactured by 1600, it is no wonder that Francis Bacon believed that print had changed the appearance and state of the world. One of the earlier forms of capitalist enterprise, book publishing felt all of capitalism's restless search for markets. The early printers established branches all over Europe. In this way, a veritable international of publishing houses, which ignored national frontiers, was created. And since the years 1500 through 1550 were a period of exceptional European prosperity, publishing shared in the general boom. More than any other time, it was a great industry under the control of wealthy capitalists. Naturally, booksellers were primarily concerned to make a profit and sell their products, and consequently, they sought out first and foremost those works which were of interest to the largest possible number of their contemporaries. The initial market was literate Europe, a wide but thin stratum of Latin readers. Saturation of this market took about 150 years. The determinative fact about Latin, aside from its sacrality, is that it was a language of bilinguals. Relatively few were born to speak it, and even fewer, one imagines, dreamed in it. In the 16th century, the proportion of bilinguals within the total population of Europe was quite small, very likely no larger than the proportion of the world's population today, and proletarian internationalism notwithstanding, in the centuries to come. Then, and now, the bulk of mankind is monoglot. The logic of capitalism thus meant that once the elite Latin market was saturated, the potentially huge markets represented by the monoglot masses would beckon. To be sure, the Counter-Reformation encouraged a temporary resurgence of Latin publishing. By the mid-17th century, the movement was in decay, and fervently Catholic libraries replete. Meantime, a Europe-wide shortage of money made printers think more and more peddling cheap editions in the vernaculars. Revolutionary vernacularizing thrust of capitalism was given further impetus by three extraneous factors, two of which contributed directly to the rise of national consciousness. The first, and ultimately the least important, was a change in the character of Latin itself. thanks to the labors of the humanists in reviving the broad literature of pre-Christian antiquity and spreading it through the print market. A new appreciation of the sophisticated stylistic achievements of the ancients was apparent among the trans-European intelligentsia. The Latin they now inspired to write became more and more Ciceronian, and by the same token increasingly removed from ecclesiastical and everyday life. In this way it acquired an esoteric quality quite different from that of the Church Latin in medieval times. For the older Latin was not arcane because of its subject matter or style, but simply because it was written at all. In other words, because of its status as a text. Now it became arcane because of what was written, because of the language in itself. Second was the impact of the Reformation, which, at the same time, owed much of its success to print capitalism. Before the age of print, Rome easily won every war against heresy in Western Europe because it had always had better internal lines of communication than its challengers. But when in 1517 Martin Luther nailed his theses to the chapel door at Wittenberg, they were printed up in German translation within 15 days had been seen in every part of the country. In the 2 decades, 1520 to 1540, 3 times as many books were published in German in the period 1500 to 1520. An astonishing transformation to which Luther was absolutely central. His works represented no less than 1/3 of all German-language books sold between 1518 and 1525. Between 1522 and 1546, a total of 430 editions, whole or partial, of his biblical translations appeared. We have here for the first time a truly mass readership and a popular literature within everybody's reach. In fact, Luther became the first best-selling author so known. Or to put it another way, the first writer who could sell his new books on the basis of his name. Where Luther led, others quickly followed, opening the colossal religious propaganda war that raged across Europe for the next century. In this titanic battle for men's minds, Protestantism was always fundamentally on the offensive, but precisely because it knew how to make use of an expanding vernacular print market being created by capitalism, while the Counter-Reformation defended the citadel of Latin. The emblem for this was the Vatican's Index Librorum Prohibitorum, to which there was no Protestant counterpart, a novel catalogue made necessary by the sheer volume of printed subversion. Nothing gives us a better sense of this siege mentality than Francois I's panicked 1535 ban on the printing of any books in his realm, on pain of death by hanging. The reason for both the ban and its unenforceability was that by then his realm's eastern borders were ringed with Protestant states and cities producing a massive stream of smugglable print. Smugglable. I like that word. To take Calvin's Geneva alone, between 1533 and 1540, only 42 editions were published there. The number swelled to 527 between 1550 and 1564, by which latter date no less than 40 separate printing presses were working overtime. The coalition between Protestantism and print capitalism, exploiting cheap popular editions, quickly created large new reading publics, not least among merchants and women, who typically knew little or no Latin, and simultaneously mobilized them for politico-religious purposes. Inevitably, it was not merely the church that was shaken to its core. The same earthquake produced Europe's first important non-dynastic, non-city states in the Dutch Republic and the Commonwealth of the Puritans. Francois I's panic was as much political as religious. Third, this is the third extraneous factor, was the slow, geographically uneven spread of particular vernaculars as instruments of administrative centralization by certain well-positioned would-be absolute monarchs. Would-be absolutist monarchs. Here it is useful to remember that the universality of Latin in medieval Western Europe never corresponded to a universal political system. In contrast with imperial China, where the reach of the Mandarinal bureaucracy and of painted characters largely coincided, is instructive. In effect, the political fragmentation of Western Europe after the collapse of the Western Empire meant that no sovereign could monopolize Latin and make it his and only his language of state, and thus Latin's religious authority never had a true political analog. The birth of administrative vernaculars predated both print and the religious upheaval of the 16th century and must therefore be regarded, at least initially, as an independent factor in the erosion of the sacred imagined community. At the same time, nothing suggests that any deep-seated ideological, let alone proto-national impulses underlay this vernacularization where it occurred. In the case of England, on the northwestern periphery of Latin Europe, that's a funny characterization of England. At the same time, nothing suggests that any deep-seated ideological, let alone proto-national impulses underlay this vernacularization where it occurred. In the case of England, on the northwestern periphery of Latin Europe, is here especially enlightening. That's funny to me. I don't know why that's funny to me. I mean, I know why. It's just I'm not going to explain. Prior to the Norman conquest, the language of the court, literary and administrative, was Anglo-Saxon. For the next century and a half, virtually all royal documents were composed in Latin. Between 1200 and 1350, the state Latin was superseded by Norman French. Norman French. In the meantime, a slow fusion between this language of a foreign ruling class and the Anglo-Saxon of the subject population produced early English. Fusion made it possible for the new language to take its turn after 1362 as the language of the courts, for the opening of the Parliament. Wyclif's vernacular manuscript Bible followed in 1382. It is essential to bear in mind that this sequence was a series of state, not national languages, and that the state concerned covered at various times not only today's England and Wales, but also portions of Ireland, Scotland, and France. Obviously, huge elements of the subject populations knew little or nothing of Latin, Norman French, or Early English. Not till almost a century after Early English's political enthronement was London's power swept out of France. On the scene, a similar movement took place, if at a slower pace. As Bloch Riley puts it, French, that is to say a language which, since it was regarded as merely a corrupt form of Latin, took several centuries to raise itself to literary dignity, only became the official language of the courts of justice in 1539. 1539. 1539. I'm reading my audio levels. 1539. 1539. When Francois I issued the Edict of Villers-Cotterets, another dynastic realms, Latin survived much longer under the Habsburgs, well into the 19th century, and still others, foreign vernaculars took over. In the 18th century, the languages of the Romanov court were French and German. In every instance, the choice of language appears as a gradual, unself-conscious, pragmatic, not to say haphazard development. As such, it was utterly different from the self-conscious language policies pursued by 19th century dynasts confronted with the rise of hostile popular linguistic nationalisms. One clear sign of the difference is that the old administrative languages were just that, languages used by and for officialdoms for their own inner convenience. There was no idea of systematically imposing the language on the dynasts, various subject populations. Nonetheless, the elevation of these vernaculars to the status of languages of power, where in one sense they were competitors with Latin, French in Paris, Early English in London, made its own contribution to the decline of the imagined community of Christendom. At bottom, it is likely that the esoterization of Latin, the reformation, and the haphazard development of administrative vernaculars are significant in the present context, primarily in a negative sense, in their contributions to the dethronement of Latin. It is quite possible to conceive of the emergence of new imagined national communities without anyone, perhaps all of them, being present. What, in a positive sense, made the new communities imaginable was a half-fortuitous but explosive interaction between a system of production and productive relations, capitalism, a system of production and productive relations, capitalism, a system of production and productive relations, capitalism, a technology of communications, print, and the fatality of human linguistic diversity. The element of fatality is essential, for whatever superhuman feats capitalism was capable of, it found in death and languages two tenacious adversaries. Particular languages can die or be wiped out. There was and is no possibility of humankind's general linguistic unification. Yet, this mutual incomprehensibility was historically of only slight importance, though capitalism and print created monoglot mass reading publics. While it is essential to keep in mind an idea of fatality, in the sense of general condition of irremediable linguistic diversity, it would be a mistake to equate this fatality with that common element in nationalist ideologies, which stresses the primordial fatality of particular languages and their association with particular territorial units. The essential thing is the interplay between fatality, technology, and capitalism. In pre-print Europe, and of course elsewhere in the world, the diversity of spoken languages, those languages that for their speakers were and are the warp and woof of their lives, was immense. So immense indeed that had print capitalism sought to exploit each potential oral vernacular market, it would have remained a capitalism of petty proportions. Ugh. But these varied idiolects were capable of being assembled. Oh God. These varied idiolects were capable of being assembled within definite limits into print languages far fewer in number. The very arbitrariness of any system of signs for sounds facilitated the assembling process. At the same time, the more ideographic the signs, the vaster the potential assembling zone. One can detect a sort of descending hierarchy here from algebra through Chinese and English to the regular syllabaries of French or Indonesian. Nothing served to assemble related vernaculars more than capitalism, which, within the limits imposed by grammars and syntaxes, created mechanically reproduced print languages capable of dissemination through the market. These print languages laid the basis for national consciousness in three distinct ways. First and foremost, they created unified fields of exchange and communication below Latin and above the spoken vernaculars. Speakers of the huge variety of Frenches, Englishes, or Spanishes, who might find it difficult or even impossible to understand one another in conversation, became capable of comprehending one another via print and in paper. In the process, they gradually became aware of the hundreds of thousands, even millions of people in their particular language field. At the same time that only those hundreds of thousands, or millions so belonged. These fellow readers, to whom they were connected through print, formed in their secular particular visible invisibility, the embryo of the nationally imagined community. Second, print capitalism gave a new fixity to language, in which the long run helped to build that image of antiquity so central to the subjective idea of the nation. As Fabre and Martin remind us, the printed book kept a permanent form capable of virtually infinite reproduction, temporally and spatially. It was no longer subject to the individualizing and unconsciously modernizing habits of monastic scribes. Thus, while 12th century French differed markedly from that written by Villon in the 15th, the rate of change slowed decisively in the 16th. By the 17th century, languages in Europe had generally assumed their modern forms. No. Put it another way, for 3 centuries now these stabilized print languages have been gathering a darkening varnish. The words of our 17th century forebears are accessible to us in a way that to Galan and his 12th century ancestors were not. Third, print capitalism created languages of power, of a kind different from the older administrative vernaculars. Certain dialects inevitably were closer to each print language and dominated their final forms. Their disadvantaged cousins, still assimilable to the emerging print language, lost taste. Above all because they were unsuccessful or only relatively successful in insisting on their own print form. Northwestern German became Platt Douche. It's Dutch, but I'm saying douche because fuck you. A largely spoken, thus substandard German, because it was assimilable to print German in a way that Bohemian spoken Czech was not. High German, King's English, and later Central Thai were correspondingly elevated to a new politico-cultural eminence. Hence the struggles in late 20th century Europe by certain sub-nationalities to change their subordinate status by breaking firmly into print and radio. It remains only to emphasize that in their origins, the fixing of print languages and the differentiation of status between them were largely unself-conscious processes resulting from the explosive interaction between capitalism, technology, and human linguistic diversity. To explain that burst of negative energy, I'm dealing with some gamma radiation right now. A bunch of fucking gammas. So, I'm going to reread that first paragraph, and you will get that meaning back. It remains only to emphasize that in their origins, the fixing of print languages and the differentiation of status between them were largely unself-conscious processes resulting from the explosive interaction between capitalism, technology, and human linguistic diversity. But as with so much else in the history of nationalism, once there, they could become formal models to be imitated, and, where expedient, consciously exploited in a Machiavellian spirit. Today, the Thai government actively discourages attempts by foreign missionaries to provide its hill tribe minorities with their own transcription systems to develop publications in their own languages. The same government is largely indifferent to what these minorities speak. The fate of the Turkic-speaking peoples in the zones incorporated in today's Turkey, Iran, Iraq, and the USSR, which should give you an idea of when this book was published, is especially exemplary. A family of spoken languages, once everywhere assimilable, thus comprehensible, within an Arabic orthography, has lost that unity as a result of conscious manipulations. To heighten Turkey's national consciousness at the expense of any wider Islamic identification, Ataturk imposed compulsory romanticization. Soviet authorities followed suit, first with anti-Islamic, anti-Persian compulsory romanization. Then in Stalin's 1930s, with a Russifying compulsory Cyrillicization. We can summarize the conclusions to be drawn from the argument thus far by saying that the convergence of capitalism and print technology on the fatal diversity of human language created the possibility of a new form of imagined community, in which its basic morphology set the stage for modern nation. The potential stretch of these communities was inherently limited, at the same time bore none but the most fortuitous relationship to existing political boundaries, which were on the whole high watermarks of dynastic expansionisms. Yet it is obvious that while today almost all modern self-conceived nations Also, nation-states have national print languages. Many of them have these languages in common, and that other languages only a tiny fraction of the population uses the national language in conversation or on paper. To account for the discontinuity in connectedness between print languages, I think I just skipped a sentence. In other words, the concrete formation of contemporary nation-states is by no means isomorphic with the indeterminate reach of particular print languages. To account for the discontinuity in connectedness between print languages, national consciousness, and nation-states, it is necessary to turn up the large cluster of new political entities that sprang up in the Western Hemisphere between 1776 and 1838. Hey, I know which one of those are. All of which self-consciously define themselves as nations, and with the interesting exception of Brazil, as non-dynastic republics. For not only were they historically the first such states to emerge on the world stage, and therefore inevitably provided the real models of what such states should look like, but their numbers and contemporary births offer fruitful ground for comparative inquiry. I know which one of those are. Again, the book is Imagine Communities, written by Benedict Anderson, published on Verso Books. Imagine Communities. Reflections on the Origin and Spread of Nationalism. That's the book cover. If you put cut up supermarket grocery paper bag around it and then tape the edges on the inside so that you have the book covered. If you do that, this is what the book looks like. God damn it. Let's smoke another cigarette. Because dealing with the gamma radiation really just fucking stresses me out. Just a second. I don't know what to play you while I'm reading the book. I don't know whether to play you the Nain Incorporated video again or the revision video again. I'll go with the squadron video again.
Ship restraints retracted. Access corridor is clear.
Flight assist off.
From the dawn of humankind, we've looked to the stars for meaning. Amidst the trivialities of existence, they have watched over us and forgiven us our awe and wonder. The briefest respite between our labors and strife. In our arrogance, we surrendered to our own conceit. Our search became our right, and for millennia we spread our message of our rightful place amongst the stars with one another. The stars aligned, we proclaimed, to provide us with the guidance we required. Our labors became our destiny, our wars our triumph. We assumed our place amongst the stars, and the stars watched over us, shimmering in approval. In time we forgot. We grew indifferent to our watchful stewards, and turned our attention away from them. We turned to one another. We saw one another, and we took the guidance given us by the stars to show one another the error of one another's ways. The stars have shown us, we proclaimed. The labors we have undertaken and the wars we have fought sanctioned by the stars and just by their guidance. And others proclaim the stars' condemnation. It is our labors and wars sanctioned. The stars have shown us, the others proclaimed. In our arrogance, we tore the stars from one another. No longer joined as our watchful stewards, the stars became ours, and our rightful place amongst the stars was true to the stars' rightful place amongst us. And in our rightful place we labored, and we made war with one another. And the wars we made with one another drove us further and further amongst the stars, amongst ourselves. And amongst ourselves we looked for meaning. How long is this? I seriously think I'm gonna read all this, do you, Dad? Yeah, this is like 5 pages of garbage. Garbage, Dad!
Girls, can you just...
What? It just goes on and on. No one cares about this kind of stuff, Dad.
Can you just...
Fine. Gosh. I'm picking up here. In 2979, a consortium of scholars, pilots, and private interests came together to discuss our future. Amidst the wars between the Federation, the Empire, and the Alliance, the intrigue, the subterfuge, and the myriad labors of all powers, we were being reminded of our place amongst the stars, and the stars have begun to remind us of their place amongst us. We were not their equals. The stars, this consortium reminded us, had given us meaning and we had squandered its resolve. The stars, this consortium reminded us, had many others over whom they'd watched. And we came to know some of those others over whom the stars watched. The Guardians had taken their place amongst the stars long before us. The Fargoods had taken their place as well. And they too, the stars, reminded of their place. The stars watched over us all, and we had all grown arrogant in our assumption of our place amongst them. In our arrogance, we had turned to one another. We had once come to know our place amongst the stars was our own, this consortium reminded us. And this consortium reminded us that the stars had watched us come to know these things. The stars have begun again to provide us with meaning this consortium now wants us to know. And this consortium is resolved to remind us of this meaning. For this meaning is given us by the stars. This meaning is given us all, and this resolve the purpose of our labors, our strife. This consortium, we are now reminded, has resolved to remind us all the meaning given us by the stars to all, be us of the Empire, the Federation, the Alliance, or any others. In 3307, the labors and the strife of this consortium, undertaken to remind us all of the meaning being given us by the stars, were given a name. My name is Cadence, and I'm a pilot. My name is Coral. That's it? What? You're just gonna say your name and that's it? You're not gonna say anything about yourself? What, I need to label myself? None of us are super insecure like you, Cadence. What? I'm not insecure, you cunt. Don't talk to me like that.
Girls,
Fish.
for fuck's sake, can you just stick to the script, please?
Anyway, we're pilots. Speak for yourself. Commanders Half-Lock. We have come to you on behalf of this consortium. We have come to call upon you, as this consortium has charged us, to take your place in the labors and strife this consortium has resolved to undertake, to remind all of the meaning being given us by the stars, to remind all of our place amongst the stars and theirs amongst us. Join us, as this consortium of scholars, pilots, and private interests had joined one another, and had resolved to remind all of the meaning being given us by the stars. We are Nain Incorporated. Dad, do we really have to use these voice changers?
Girls.
Yeah,
Hold
it's,
on.
we just sound like
Girls.
a couple of guys.
We've assigned a landing pad for you. Be careful.
You can't hear me. Now you can hear me. I'm going to go back and restate what I just said. So there's updates on the Elite Development, or Elite Dangerous and Frontier Development front. David Braben wrote a piece in Financial Times discussing Frontier developments and what are apparently current talks about a buyout of the company. He's saying that's not going to happen. There are specific barriers, I believe is the quote, the possibility of a full-on buyout. Apparently stock shares are lower than normal. He believes it a shame that these shares are being bought up by overseas companies as opposed to British firms. I'm ambivalent. If you guys want to buy up a bunch of shares and then generously donate them to me, I would be totally fine with that. I have no issue with owning shares in the company. Nonetheless, I am particularly comfortable with the idea of David Braben and the rest of the Frontier Developments team maintaining control of a franchise that I have fallen in love with in terms of video gaming, and making sure that their vision remains succinct and cohesive. But while we're at it, as I just mentioned while looking into the camera while on mute, without realizing it, I would love for them. They're probably not watching, but if you are, I would love it if you did some rebalancing. It would be really great. You did some rebalancing of weapons, particularly dumbfire missiles. Make them relatively more useful under conditions where PAs have essentially become the dumbfire missile of use because they can't be blocked or defended against at all. Like at all. Like a cloaking mechanism like I put on in the forums, maybe. Cloaking for the missiles. That'd be nice. Also, a way to fly in the black where you can't figure out, where you can't scan a person and find out who their pledge is. Or who they're pledged to in the event that you are running piracy missions or something, or assassination missions, and you don't want to be known to be running assassination missions for the Empire or the Federation. With, of course, the necessary balancing of, altering the fucking mod scanners to allow you to do so. Things of that sort. It'd just be nice. I'd like it. PAs are fine. Plasma accelerators are fine. I use them all the time. They're perfectly fine for what they are. But I would just like these missiles. I like using missiles. They're fun weapons. And the debuffs they provide are fun. I'm sure there's a way to balance it. I'm sure there's a way. Anyway, beyond that Frontier Developments news, my normal sources of Galnet information have yet to update themselves. I haven't turned the game on today, so I do not have access to that information if there has been a new Galnet update. Galnet Digest put out a new video. I don't know what that video is. And they normally put out any updates to Galnet, but the last one happened to be far more commander-oriented. So it looks like there's an update from Arthur Tolmie of the community development team. Hold on, let me read this. Oh, there's not. It's just a video of a bar somewhere. I don't even know if this is a real place or if this is a ship interior. It looks to be a real place. It appears that that is a real room. There's a video of a real room on lead community manager Arthur Tolmey's Twitter account of, I guess, what's going on in Frontier Development, or this is his own house. I don't know. I can't tell. Nonetheless, yeah, nothing going on within game as far as I can tell. But moving on to the next piece. This final piece for this mini semester of shit to read. And again, if you haven't been watching, this will be the last of my reading streams for a while. I'm going into some relatively heady territory in the narrative that I'm writing. So I will be taking a break from reading the stuff that I've been reading so that I can focus on the writing, focus on a little more of doing my own reading rather than reading to you stuff that I've already read, to give you sort of an idea of where my head's at while I'm doing these narrative explorations of the amalgam of shit that is brewing and distilling up here, which should give you about 8 weeks or so, 6 to 8 weeks of readings, just sort of get you to a place where you understand the way the world works. The new intro video, as I mentioned at the top of the stream, was released with the most recent? I don't know the order of the shit. The most recent or second to most recent Inara log. Where is it? It is the most recent of the Inara logs of the year. The walls also have eyes. So I've released a new video with an original piece of music of my own, written and produced, and oddly enough mixed down in a way that I don't generally take the care to do. Along with another set of videos having to do with the stuff that I was doing for the Imperial War in Summerland, which I did not participate in the CG. But for reasons that are enunciated in this year's Nain logs, which begin this year with the log Corla's Released, which I published on January 23rd. So if you've already read the entirety of To Kill a King, you can begin again with Corla's Released, and that'll give you an idea of sort of where this year's stuff is going to generally surround. A lot of stuff happening within the Frontier Development narrative, in which my 2-character, 3-character individualized stories are embedded. So do that also. Also, the video is specifically catered to give you a better idea of what is going on within the lives of these 2 pilots and their handler, the man in the suit, whom I will actually introduce you to at the end of the stream. I hadn't intended on doing it, but I will do it for you again. I don't know if it's worth reading the bios, but I will give you like a brief intro again. Now, this final reading is from a book, another book that was assigned to me through a group of teachers, professors at my former university. This was not a reading that was assigned, but I took it upon myself to read this stuff because I found the book and the work to be very interesting. It is a book called Means Without End. Another book written by the author Giorgio Agamben, who is a professor of philosophy at God knows which university at this point. He's an Italian dude. One of the more renowned Italian philosophers of his time, which is now. He recently put out a book pertaining to his thoughts on the governmental response, the broad spread government responses to the COVID-19 pandemic. He's also putting out a book called Burned House, or Houses Burning Down, or something, having to do with houses burning down or something. A lot of his books have been published on SUP, which is the Stanford University Press, which is right down the road, and every bit as irritating to me every time I go around there and hear anything about them, from them. And also, I believe, Zone Books. So if you're interested in the Italian philosopher's work, you are always welcome to pick those books up. This is a book that was published on I believe this was University of Minneapolis, or University of Minnesota, rather. Double check that. Come on, buddy. Yes. It was originally published as a part of their Theory Out of Bounds series of books, translated by Vincenzo Binetti and Cesare Casarino. Means Without End, Notes on Politics, published by the University of Minneapolis Press in London. I guess it wasn't originally published by the University of Minnesota. It was originally published by Volati Boringhieri Editori, which is, I guess, Italian, and translated and then published by the University of Minnesota, which is an equal opportunity educator and employer, according to their own notes. Anyway, chapter is called The Face. It's chapter 8, called The Face. God damn it. All living beings are in the open. They manifest themselves and shine in their appearance. But only human beings want to take possession of this opening, seize hold of their own appearance and of their own being manifest. Language is this appropriation which transforms nature into face. This is why appearance becomes a problem for human beings. It becomes the location of a struggle for truth. The face is at once the irreparable being exposed of humans and the very opening in which they hide and stay hidden. The face is the only location of community, the only possible city. And that is because that which in single individuals opens up to the political is the tragic comedy of truth, in which they always already fall out, of which they have to find a way. In which they always already fall, and out of which they have to find a way. The face is the only location of community, the only possible city. Oh my God. And that is because that which in single individuals opens up to the political is the tragicomedy of truth, in which they always already fall, and out of which they have to find a way. What the face exposes and reveals is not something that could be formulated as a signifying proposition of sorts, nor is a secret doomed to remain forever incommunicable. The face's revelation is the revelation of language itself. Such a revelation, therefore, does not have any real content, does not tell the truth about this or that state of being, about this or that aspect of human beings and of the world. It is only opening, only communicability. To walk in the light of the face means to be this opening, and to suffer it, and to endure it. Thus, the face is, above all, the passion of revelation, the passion of language. Nature acquires the face precisely in the moment it feels that it is being revealed by language. Nature's being exposed and betrayed by the word, its veiling itself behind the impossibility of having a secret, appears on its face as either chastity or perturbation, as either shamelessness or modesty. The face does not coincide with the visage. There is a face wherever something reaches the level of exposition and tries to grasp its own being exposed. Wherever a being that appears sinks in that appearance and has to find a way out of it. Thus, art can give a face even to an inanimate object, to a still nature. And that is why the witches, when accused by the inquisitors of kissing Satan's anus during the Sabbath, argued that even there was a face. There was a face in Satan's anus. That's what the words say. It may be that nowadays the entire earth, which has been transformed into a desert by humankind's blind will, might become one single face. I look someone in the eyes. Either these eyes are cast down, and this is modesty, that is, modesty for the emptiness lurking behind the gaze, or they look back at me. And they can look back at me shamelessly, thereby exhibiting their own emptiness as if there was another abyssal eye behind it that knows this emptiness and uses it as an impenetrable hiding place, or they can look at me with a chaste impudence and without reserve, thereby letting love and the word happen in the emptiness of our gazes. Exposition is the location of politics. There is no animal politics. That is perhaps because animals are always already in the open and do not try to take possession of their own exposition. They simply live in it without caring about it. If there is no animal politics, that is perhaps because animals are already ready in the open. Always already in the open. And do not try to take possession of their own exposition. They simply live in it without caring about it. That is why they are not interested in mirrors, in the image as image. Human beings, on the other hand, separate images from things and give them a name, precisely because they want to recognize themselves, but as they want to take possession of their own very appearance. Human beings thus transform the open into a world, that is, into the battlefield of a political struggle without quarter. This struggle, whose object is truth, goes by the name of history. It is happening more and more often that in pornographic photographs the portrayed subjects, by a calculated stratagem, look into the camera, thereby exhibiting the awareness of being exposed to the gaze. Exhibiting the awareness of being exposed to the gaze. This unexpected gesture violently belies the fiction that is implicit in the consumption of such images, according to which the one who looks surprises the actors while remaining unseen by them. The latter, rather, knowingly challenge the voyeur's gaze and force him to look them in the eyes. In that precise moment, the insubstantial nature of the human face suddenly comes to light. The fact that the actors look into the camera means that they show that they are simulating. Nevertheless, They paradoxically appear more real precisely to the extent to which they exhibit this falsification. Procedure is used today in advertising. The image appears more convincing if it shows openly its own artifice. In both cases, the one who looks is confronted with something that concerns unequivocally the essence of the face, the very structure of truth. We may call tragicomedy of appearance the fact that the face uncovers only and precisely inasmuch as it hides, and hides to the extent which it uncovers. In this way. Fucking absolutely in this way over there. In this way, the appearance that ought to have manifested human beings becomes for them instead a resemblance that betrays them and in which they can no longer recognize themselves. Precisely because the face is solely the location of truth, it is also and immediately the location of simulation and of an irreducible impropriety. This does not mean, however, that appearance dissimulates what it uncovers by making it look like what in reality it is not. Rather, what human beings truly are is nothing other than this dissimulation and this disquietude within the appearance. Because human beings neither are nor have any essence, any nature, or any specific destiny. Their condition is the most empty and most insubstantial of all. It is the truth. What remains hidden from them is not something behind appearance, but rather appearing itself. That is, their being nothing other than a face. The task of politics is to return appearance itself to appearance, to cause appearance itself to appear. The face, truth, and exposition are today the objects of global civil war, whose battlefield is social life in its entirety, whose stormtroopers are the media, whose victims are all the peoples of Earth. The face, truth, and exposition are today the objects of a global civil war, whose battlefield is social life in its entirety, whose stormtroopers are the media, whose victims are all the peoples of the Earth. Politicians, the media establishment, and the advertising industry have understood the insubstantial character of the face and of the community it opens up, and thus they transform it into a miserable secret that they must make sure to control at all costs. State power is no longer founded on the monopoly of legitimate use of violence, a monopoly that states share increasingly willingly with other non-sovereign organizations, such as the United Nations and terrorist organizations. Rather, it is founded above all on the control of appearance, of doxa. The fact that politics constitutes itself as an autonomous sphere goes hand in hand with the separation of the face in the world of spectacle, the world in which human communication is being separated from itself. Exposition thus transforms itself into a value that is accumulated in images and in the media, while a new class of bureaucrats jealously watches over its management. If what human beings had to communicate to each other were always and only something, there would never be politics properly speaking, but only exchange and conflict, signals and answers. But because what human beings have to communicate to each other is above all a pure communicability, that is language. Politics then arises as the communicative emptiness in which the human face emerges as such. It is precisely this empty space that politicians and the media establishment are trying to be sure to control, by keeping it separate in a sphere that guarantees its unseizability, by preventing the communicativity itself from coming to light. This means that Marxian analysis would take into consideration the fact that capitalism, whatever the name we might want to give it to the process dominating world history today, not only was directed to the expropriation of productive activity, but was also and above all directed to the alienation of language itself, of the communicability, of the communicative nature of human beings. Inasmuch as it is nothing but pure communicability, every human face, even the most noble and beautiful, is always suspended on the edge of an abyss. This is precisely why the most delicate and graceful faces sometimes look as if they might suddenly decompose, thus letting the shapeless and bottomless background that threatens them emerge. But this amorphous background is nothing else than the opening itself, and communicability itself, inasmuch as they are constituted as their own presuppositions, as if they were a thing. The only face to remain uninjured is the one capable of taking the abyss of its own communicability upon itself and exposing it without fear or complacency. That is why the face contracts into an expression, stiffens into a character, and thus sinks further and further into itself. As soon as the face realizes that communicability is all that it is, and hence that it has nothing to express, thus withdrawing silently behind itself, inside its own mute identity, and it turns into a grimace. That is what one calls character. Character is the constitutive reticence that human beings retain in the word, but what one has to take possession of here is only a non-latency, a pure visibility, simply a visage. The face is not something that transcends the visage, it is the exposition of the visage in all its nudity. It is a victory over character. It is word. Everything for human beings is divided between proper and improper, true and false, possible and real. This is because they are or have to be only a face. Every appearance that manifests human beings thus becomes for them improper and factitious, and makes them confront the task of turning truth into their own proper truth. But truth itself is not something of which we can take possession, nor is it of any object other than appearance and the improper. It is simply their composition, their exposition. Totalitarian politics of the modern, rather, is the will to total self-possession. Here either the improper extends its own rule everywhere, thanks to an unrestrainable will, to falsification and consumption, as happens in advanced industrial democracies, or the proper demands the exclusion of any impropriety, as happens in the so-called totalitarian states. In both these grotesque counterfeits of the face, the only truly human possibility is lost. That is, the possibility of taking possession of impropriety as such, of exposing in the face simply your own proper impropriety, of walking in the shadow of its light. The human face reproduces the duality that constitutes it within its own structure. That is, the duality of proper and improper, of communication and communicability, of potentiality and act. The face is formed by a passive background on which the active expression traits emerge. Just as the star mirrors its elements, and the combination of the elements into one root in its two superimposed triangles, so too the organs of the countenance divide into two levels. For the life points of the countenance are, after all, those points where the countenance comes into contact with the world above, be it passive or active contact. Basic level is according to the receptive organs. They are the face, the mask, namely forehead and cheeks, to which belong respectively nose and ears. Nose and ears are the organs of pure receptivity. This first triangle thus is formed by the midpoint of the forehead. Oh God. As the midpoint of the entire face and the midpoint of the cheeks. Over it now imposed a second triangle. Do my eyes bug out when I cough? Tell me. Over it is now imposed a second triangle, composed of the organs whose activity quickens the rigid mask of the first, eyes and mouth. In advertising and pornography, consumer society, the eyes and the mouth come to the foreground. In totalitarian states, that's what he really means. Yeah, that's what he really means. Stop it. The passive background is dominant, the inexpressive images of tyrants and in their offices. But only the reciprocal game between these two levels constitutes the life of the face. There are two words in Latin that derive from the Indo-European root meaning one, similis, which expresses resemblance, and simul, which means at the same time. Thus, next to similitudo, resemblance, there is simultas. Yep. That is, the fact of being together, which implies also rivalry, enmity. And next to similarity, to be like, there is similarity, to copy, to imitate, which applies also to feign, to simulate. The face is not a simulacrum, in the sense that it is something dissimulating or hiding the truth. The face is the simultas, being together of manifold visages constituting it. in which none of the visages is truer than any of the others. To grasp the face's truth means to grasp not the resemblance, but rather the simultaneity of visages. It is the restless power that keeps them together and constitutes their being in common. The face of God, thus, the simulatus of human faces, is our effigy that Dante saw in the living light of paradise. My face is my outside, a point of indifference with respect to all my properties, with respect to what is properly one's own and what is common, what is internal and what is external. In the face I exist with all my properties, my being brown, tall, pale, proud, emotional. But this happens without any of these properties essentially identifying me or belonging to me. Face is the threshold of depropriation. Face is the threshold of depropriation and of the de-identification of all manners and all qualities. A threshold in which only the latter becomes purely communicable. And only where I find a face do I encounter an exteriority, and does an outside happen to me. Be only your face. Go to the threshold. Do not remain the subjects of your properties or faculties. Do not stay beneath them. Rather go with them, in them, beyond them. So, speaking of fucking faces, some faces are just make people want to do violence to them. I know that to some people I have that face, but to others, they're the face to me. So, be your own face, but don't be that face. Don't be the face that I want to punch, or that someone else wants to punch. That's my recommendation for the day. What the fuck are these people doing? Anyway, so I'm now going to reintroduce you to Coral and Cadence Nain. Who are the main characters in the Nain logs as of right now. Now it is it was my initial intent to possibly expand the Nain logs to other authors who might want to work within this subsetting, which is described in the... I'm looking at my computer screen, I'm not just staring weirdly at you. Who may want to write in this subsetting. And that is not to say that it is no longer my intent to do so. But I am not exactly that interested in expanding beyond the sphere in which I've already done so in terms of where the narrative is. So you'll have to forgive this, that, and the other thing. Also, you won't have to forgive that because it shouldn't matter to you if you're not interested. I'm gonna find a photo of two of them. This right here. That is Cadence. That is Cadence name. Now you have a face to name that you never didn't have. For anyone that's been reading the Nain logs. Cadence Nain, the biography I have provided, or I wrote. The biography that I have written for her, for those of you who don't know, she was a imperial slave born on QBO 3. I don't know how. I'll pronounce it how the fuck I want to pronounce it. Born on QBO 3, whose father was placed into what the organization that she represents referred to as an illegal slavery contract, in terms of what the legalities of imperial slavery are. I can't tell if that's fucking Cadence or Coral. Probably Coral. So, due to the illegal nature of that contract, she was freed, and then her life happens as it unfolds in the narrative. This here, I don't track cameras well on this. This here is Coral Nain. This here is Coral Nain. Coral Nain was born in Sirius space. Coral Nain was born in Sirius space. Sirius governed space. Pardon. To a family of, I think the writing was engineers and smart people and shit, who found themselves in the organization that is now understood to be, or at least is represented publicly by Nain Incorporated, which is the organization in which each of these two pilots are currently squadron leaders on their respective platforms, which are, I'll write this down now so you guys can see it. Oh yeah, man, it's fucked up. I'm just going to go ahead and read their bios for you, as I have written them. I think I was in the middle of explaining Corals. Yeah, so she was born into a family of smart people who found themselves under the influence, or rather joining up with the consortium. This is different than the other consortiums that I've made contact with within the game. That is now currently currently representing itself publicly with the corporation of Nain Inc. Oh god. So, 4 members around Discord. Discord and through the gaming community are well familiar with Rule 34 jokes I've been making. I don't care, that's just funny to me. If you don't know what Rule 34 is, look it up. It's just a funny joke. I think it's funny, it makes me laugh. But you have these two young, beautiful pilots who are essentially both unrepentant serial killers. No better way to put it. One of whom, again, was born on Cubeo 3. I'll read you the bio that I have written down for each, just to give you that final intro before I dive right back into sort of the heavy-handed nature of the narratives that I'm entering into, which is going to take a lot of focus, unfortunately, because of the degree to which I wrote myself into something relatively difficult. So you can find these both on enera.cz, which is the website that was, it's a platform produced by a person named Artie, who runs the website for Elite Dangerous players, to use both for information collection and also for the specific purpose of publishing these books within a solid format. It's an easy way to keep track of what's going on in your own accounts without having to, especially if you're not on fucking PC, without having to take all these notes and constantly do that. It's an awesome tracking website. Now, speaking for myself, before I read you this bio, since we're on we touched on the topic of fucking Braven doing this thing, what would be a fucking awesome investment for them would be to buy out fucking Renara, and then take hold of all those fucking narratives and put those into the game. It'd be an immense fucking wellspring of fucking ideas. I mean, they probably can't. They're ways. I'm sure there are things. Anyway, so the Inara bio, bam, of Canaan's Nain begins as such. He was born on Cubeo. Canaan's Nain, one of two commanders flying under the call sign Half-Lock, was born on Cubeo 3 during the rule of Emperor Hengist Duval. Right? Her father, a native imperial citizen of low stature himself, signed what he believed to be a legitimate imperial slave contract in order to work off debts related to his late wife's illnesses. That stipulated the employment of both his wife and his young daughter Cadence in the repayment of debts. The consortium that Cadence now represents publicly along with her fellow trainee Coral Nain as Nain Incorporated had been making inroads into imperial society and took it upon itself to research the annulment of what was deemed an illegal slave contract. Thus, Cadence and her father were freed, under conditions still considered suspicious to many imperial officials, and were absconded into Federation space. Shortly afterward, Cadence was recruited into a pilot training program on behalf of the consortium by the agents of her liberation, to whom she only still refers as the man in the black suit. Under his tutelage, Cadence found herself exceeding the expectations placed upon her by the consortium, and she, along with Coral and her other fellow trainees, were accelerated through the Pilots Federation's qualification examinations before being sent along to the consortium's various enterprises across governed space. Cadence, for her part, resettled in Cubeo, operating out of Chelomi Orbital for a significant period of time, running into Coral from time to time, who'd also been previously assigned to Chelomi Orbital. As one of the Man in the Black Suit's binary command leads, Coral being the second of the pair, Cadence's work amongst the Imperials quickly became a boon for the consortium, whose work at finding a place for itself within Imperial machinery culminated with a promotion to the rank of King of the Imperial Navy Auxiliary. That's just so for those of you who don't know the game, it's like a level. You reach the level of King when you do a bunch of shit. Not one to associate herself with such ceremony, Cadence's means are generally the result of various successfully conducted trading opportunities, and her acceptance into the elite Federation of Pilots was directly related to her activities in the field of commerce. Which is about money, bro. She's been known to associate with various pilots, Imperial, Federal, Alliance, and Independent alike. And the consortium is under constant scrutiny for its alleged apolitical approach to conducting its operations. Cadence's own attitudes surrounding her relationships with Imperial institutions and organizations have been a thorn in the side of the man in the black suit, and this appears to be perfectly fine with Cadence. That is your bio for Cadence Nain, the fictional character of Cadence Nain, which is, again, this person here, whose face that is. Now, if you want to try to relate that to the work, the fiction's best task of being oneself, or itself, is to be the fictional Cadence Nain. You wanna scrub it like that. Fucking douchebags. Now the next, there's a lot going on, as you can tell. The other pilot in this duo, this dynamic duo of bodacious babeness, of killers, is Coral Nain. Again, Coral Nain, born in Sirius space. Yeah, you should read. You should read the actual logs. Now, actually, I should point out that these bios were written after To Kill a King, so they do deal in some matters that were only covered over the course of the year's worth of logs that I wrote, which are again available in EPUB on the link on the page. Born in Sirius governed space to parents whose work in science and engineering brought them to the attention of and into the fold of the consortium, Coral Nain was put to training for the work of the consortium at a young age. A student of exceptional merit, she was charged with the continued training of the man to whom her co-squadron leader, Cadence Nain, also call sign Half-Lock, no relation, refers as the man in the black suit. Yes, they are not sisters. Their names are both Nain. Their surnames are both Nain. Their names both begin with C. And they are both trainees of the same organizational handler. She was charged with the continued training of the man to whom her co-squadron leader, Cadence Nain, also call sign Half-Lock, no relation, refers to as the man in the black suit. Simply Dad to Coral. The man in the black suit invested significant intellectual and organizational resources into the project that culminated in Nain Incorporated, the public face of the consortium, which Coral coordinates in tandem with Cadence. This investment was not returned as Cadence and Coral, for reasons their own, forced the hands of those within the consortium working with the man in the black suit into revealing more about the nature of the project than they had planned at the outset, to the depraved enjoyment of others within the consortium. Coral, having borne witness to, and having participated in, the myriad violences demanded of her by the consortium's training regime, tends to show far less interest in the various tasks in which her co-squadron leader, Cadence, has participated, opting to spend more of her time with the pursuit of her intellectual interests and the strategic aims demanded of Nain Incorporated by the consortium. Originally assigned to Cubeo, in preparation for Cadence's passage into the Pilots Federation, Coral's tasking has since been taken over completely by the man in the black suit, who has tended toward a hands-off approach, preferring to yield to the former's judgment with regard to her own day-to-day operational activities. Again, those are the biographies of Cadence Nain and Coral Nain. The logs themselves are written in the first-person perspective through a series of vignettes flashbacks and recountings of the days, the weeks, the months, the various time periods, events. There is dialogue at times. For the most part, the dialogue is fairly dry. I'm not a dialogist by trade. And I am doing the thing where I have to make sure that the dialogue remains relatively fucking based within the communicative norms of two 19-year-old girls that don't spend a lot of time with other people, but kill people all the time. So those are obviously based on, my own experiences with women of that younger age range, which fucking unfortunately for me has stretched beyond the period of time that I would have wanted it to. But that is sort of what it is. So you'll get a lot of internal dialogue and internal recounting, internal observations of things. You'll also get a little bit of dialogue. You'll get flashbacks. But those background stories are not necessarily enunciated in the text. So I've had to put it there to give people sort of a better understanding of who these people are, based on a relative understanding that I'm putting out there through the narratives. I don't have a picture of the man in the black suit. I don't have any intention of providing a visage. I'm not going to use that word. There's providing a face to attach that name. I'm not gonna do it. But you will occasionally get other photos of Cadence and Coral. You will get videos of what they're doing. I may provide more videos over the course of the logs in the same way that I provided the videos of the initial introduction, which brought many of the readers from the point at the end of last year where Cadence received the promotion to kingship to the point at which Coral was coming back from Los, for things that she was doing out there, which also appear in the previous year's logs. And the video that was just played on the intro today, which sort of sums up what's been going on in game, and also sort of provides a visual, a slight visual cue. What do they call it? A visual aesthetic to how you might want to look at the narratives up to this point. I have no other thoughts pertaining to this right now, and I kind of just want to go in and start playing and checking out Colonia for a little longer. The Colonia CG is still going. The Alcor CG is still going. It appears to be the case that the Colonia side of the Colonia Bridge phase has reached Tier 2, which is good. It looks to me like I may have dropped from top 10 to top 25%. Top 10% to top 25%, which is what it is. Took a lot longer to get out there in my fleet carrier than I expected, and I didn't feel like going all the way back out there to the bubble and then spending however long it takes and then going back. It's such a fucking long time. It also looks to be the case that the Alcor side of the CG has reached Tier 2 as well. I don't have the numbers in front of me pertaining to how many more contributions they need to reach Tier 3. Tier 3 is missions for all these places, mission contracts. And I want to get in there and start playing again. So I suppose I could end the stream, or I guess I could play a little bit. I have to do it via PlayStation remote. Which could be an issue for my HOTUS. So I think I'm just going to log off. I'm going to log off and then I'll log back in and start streaming from my PlayStation directly. And that will be Coral's End. So we'll see what I feel like flying when I get it. I hope you all the best. Well, not all of you. I hope some of you the best. To the others that I don't wish the best, sorry that you're that face.
Mission objective detected. Flight assist off. Flight assist off.
Further Omega Grid secrets revealed. ACT has released details about a plan by the Lords of Restoration to frame Hadrian Augustus Duval as the leader of the NMLA. The information was extracted from the NMLA's Omega Grid network and published by Captain Saskia Landau. It was Senator Ursula Torquates who devised a scheme to undermine the imperial family and turn citizens against them by exposing a Duval as the NMLA mastermind. Hadrian Duval was seen as the logical choice since many viewed him as an extremist through his prior association with Nova Imperium, though Emperor Arisa Lavigny Duval officially pardoned him in 3306. The Lords of Restoration used a virtual doppelganger of the Emperor, indistinguishable from authentic transmissions, to convince the Senate that she was communicating from a safe location. A similar doppelganger was developed to replicate Hadrian and was used to send orders to NMLA allies such as the Landgrave of Madrid. This is how they planted evidence, discovered in April 3307, that Hadrian had converted to Neo-Marlinism and was determined to wipe out all other Duvals. Yet, despite triggering an unsuccessful federal attack in the Paris system, the accusation was not verified or widely believed. Months later, the Lords of Restoration tried to kill Hadrian and Lady Astrid before their son Hector could be born, fearing the continuation of the Duval dynasty. But other senators moved the family to a secure location, beyond the reach of their agents. Hadrian Duval has publicly thanked ACT for uncovering this information and officially absolving him of all suspicion in this matter.